Hey guys, Colin Craig at lotusphotography.ca. It's our fourth video in regards to getting you guys off the automatic settings on your new or current digital DSLR camera, getting onto manual so that you can control your picture some more. So we've talked about ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. So this is a sort of the triangle, if you will, of your settings that control how each picture you take comes out. So if you haven't seen those videos yet, or you're not too sure what those are, definitely take a look at those first of all, because I'm going to be referring back to those settings in this video, and if you don't understand what those are, it's not going to be very useful. So you can click on any of the options here to go watch those videos. If you've seen those already, or you already know what those are, then great. So the next stage that I would suggest going into moving into these manual settings, if you go directly to manual when you're taking your picture and you've never done it before, it can be a little bit overwhelming, because trying to play around with those three different settings, you know, what should my shutter speed be, what should my aperture be, and what should my ISO be, can be a little bit daunting. So if you're not really wanting to jump into it right away, one thing you can do, and what I did was, you can use the presets on the camera. So not just putting it on the auto setting and taking your picture, but using the aperture priority mode. On all the cameras, usually it's just a label A. If you look at the radial dial, you'll see an A available, so that means aperture priority. So basically what that means is that you control what the aperture is on the lens or on the camera when you're taking a picture, and the camera itself then will decide on the shutter speed and the ISO. So basically that's going on in the background while you're controlling the aperture. It's a good way to start moving yourself into the fully manual, because with just worrying about the aperture, what you can do is when you take the picture and you set the aperture yourself, remembering the aperture, basically you're going to set, depending on what you're taking the picture of, so you're going to set it, you're going to know what depth of field you want, and you're going to know what setting, whether it be a lower aperture or higher aperture, to get what you want in focus. Whether you want just a small plane of field where you're just taking maybe a portrait and you want the back all blurred, or whether you want everything in focus like a landscape or something like that. If you're taking everything in focus, then you're going to use a higher f-stop or higher aperture. So you're going to control that, because you're going to know what exactly you want there. In the background, the camera is going to work on the other two settings, the shutter speed and the ISO. As you progress with that and take more pictures with that, you can take a look at what the camera actually chose. So if you took a picture and you have set the aperture yourself and you like how the picture came out, definitely take a look at the settings of what the camera had chosen for that shot, and then kind of keep that in mind. And as the more pictures you take and you like the look of those pictures, you're going to get a good idea of what those other two settings should be. Now, the only time I wouldn't advise shooting in aperture mode for this sort of practice is if you're shooting something like sports or anything where there's going to be a lot of movement, because what you might want to do for that is actually shoot in shutter priority mode, which is usually just an S. What that means is you're going to control the shutter speed. So as we talked about before, shutter speed it's crucial if you have movement in a picture. If something's moving across the picture, or say you're, I don't know, taking a picture of a hockey game or something, and they're moving quick, if your shutter speed isn't quick enough, you're just going to get a blur. It's not gonna freeze the motion. It's not gonna freeze the image. So if you're doing sports or anything like that, you're definitely gonna want to shoot in the shutter priority, and then that way you're gonna set the shutter speed, and the camera's gonna take care of the rest. Now again, I definitely advise, you can use those as practice, but I definitely advise getting into that manual mode as soon as possible. And it might be overwhelming, as I say, the first couple of times, but once you really think about what each setting does, really shouldn't be too much of an issue. Any normal picture, like the majority of pictures I take are portraits. So in that regards, it's fairly simple. The shutter speed, because there's no movement, you really don't have to worry about. You can have it like a 60th of a second. Your ISO, I usually try to recommend to keep your ISO as low as you can without affecting your light too much. So you want to get it close to that 100 or 200 depending on what your camera can do to keep as much kind of quality as possible, and then keeping the aperture basically as low as possible, like 2.8, or if your lens can even do that, 2.8 or something like that. So you get nice crisp focus on the person and blurring out the background. So basically, once you know how those three settings affect what you're taking, and then yourself, get in a frame of mind of what's most important. You know, if I was a sports photographer, then my priority is going to be the shutter speed. So I'm going to do what I have to get that shutter speed as quick as possible, like 400th of a second, something like that, to actually freeze the motion. So I'm not going to care too much about, I'm going to put the ISO higher so that it gets more light into the camera. My aperture, I'm not going to have to, I'm going to keep it as low as I can to get as much light in, but yet I'm going to probably bump it up as well, because even if you do slightly miss focus, the higher the aperture, the larger depth of field. So even if I miss the focus a bit, because the motion's quick, I should still get a good depth of field, so I will get that person still in focus. So as I say, a little bit tricky when first moving into it, but once you start shooting a manual and see how the three different settings affect what you're doing, you'll be a lot more confident with it, and you'll find that the pictures you can control exactly how you want to see them, how they're going to turn out, instead of just relying on the camera. So, so again, just focusing on the main thing is what your subject is. If you're shooting something stationary, motion, or if you want the large depth of field. I mean, those are the three main types of things you're going to be dealing with, and that's where you're going to decide what is my most important thing. Is freezing the motion the most important thing, in which case you're going to focus first of all on your shutter speed. Is the small depth of field the priority, in which case you're going to work with the aperture, and again, like landscapes or something with a really large depth of field, again you're going to work with the aperture. So playing around with those three settings, and that's really the only way you can get used to it, is playing around with it. So when you're not doing anything too important, you know, not taking a hockey game or doing a birthday or something that the images really, you have to be right. Until you're comfortable with the manual, I would use the manual, whenever it's not something important like that, just playing around the house or just practicing. Take the manual settings. What you could do is take a shot with one of the auto settings, take a look at those settings, switch it over into manual, and then take the picture yourself, and then slightly play around with each setting to see how it affects your image, so you can get comfortable with using it, because until you get into using the fully manual settings on the camera, you're really not doing yourself justice. You're really not developing your own style. You're just using something that's automated. A lot of the times the camera will be tricked by what it sees in regards to different light. For example, if you were to leave it on auto settings and then at a hockey game and take a picture, the chances are that the person you're taking the picture of is going to be extremely dark, because the camera sees all the white of the ice and thinks that the image is too bright, and so it will automatically darken it. So your subject is going to be darker, whereas when you're in full control of that, you know that your subject, the person you want to take the picture of, you know you want them to be clear and them to be bright, so you're not going to make your image darker. So things like that you really have to learn to control this manual setting, so that you can control exactly how your image appears. So that's the last video in regards to getting off the manual settings on the camera. So we hope you learned something from this. If there's anything that you feel that we missed or something you need explained on a little bit more detail, feel free to leave a comment below. We'll definitely get to it. Keep the requests coming in to colin@lotusphotography.ca on what videos you guys want to see here. As I say, they will now be going up once a week, and we hope you get a lot from it, and we appreciate your continued support. This is Colin Craig at lotusphotography.ca.